Hello. Today we are going to read The Penguin Who Hated the Cold. Our story takes us way, way down to the South Pole. It's always winter there. The land is full of ice and snow. It's also full of penguins, and most penguins love the cold. They like to go skiing and swimming and skating, and they love to play in the snow at the beach. But there was one penguin who hated the cold. The penguin's name was Pablo. Pablo never played in the ice and snow. Instead, Pablo stayed inside his igloo, close to his hot stove. He kept his flippers and his feathers warm, but he never felt warm enough. Pablo was always dreaming about warm places, so one day he decided to go to a place where it would be hot all the time. Pablo put on his snowshoes and started to walk up the hill. All the other penguins came out to wish him well, and Pablo turned to wave goodbye. But as Pablo waved, he froze in place. Pablo tumbled down the hill. He rolled over and over until he became a giant snowball. Crash! Pablo bowled over his friends and rolled back into his igloo. Pablo wouldn't give up. I won't freeze if I bring my stove with me, he thought. So the little penguin put on his skis and packed his stove on his back, and he started up the hill again. Once more, he turned to wave goodbye. And once more, the other penguins wished Pablo a safe trip. But their wish came too late. The heavy stove pulled Pablo backwards. Down the hill he went, faster and faster. He whizzed straight towards some cliffs, and suddenly Pablo was hanging upside down. His skis had caught on the icy cliffs, and he was frozen stiff again. The other penguins shook their heads. Two of them took Pablo home to his igloo and thawed him out in his bathtub. Pablo still wouldn't give up. He kept dreaming of a sunny island. The air would be warm, the sand would be warm, even the water would be warm. The thought of warm water gave Pablo an idea. The little penguin got out all his hot water bottles and he filled them with hot water. Then he put the hot water bottles on his feet and under his coat and around his neck, and he turned to wave goodbye, and Pablo was sure that nothing would go wrong this time. But something did. When Pablo stopped to look at his map, the hot water bottles melted the snow. Then they melted the ice, and Pablo began to sink. He sank into the icy water. When the other penguins pulled him out, Pablo was frozen in a block of ice. And once again, they carried Pablo back to his igloo to thaw out. But Pablo still wouldn't give up. By the time the hot stove melted the ice around him, he had an idea. He would sail to a warm island. The next morning, Pablo got a saw. He cut a boat out of the ice under his igloo, and then he put up a mast and a sail, and his boat was ready to go. Pablo took a deep breath and waved goodbye, and then he sailed away. Pablo sailed for days and days. He kept looking for sunny islands, but all he saw were igloos. Pablo sailed from the South Pole to the tip of South America. He checked his map. There was a line on the map called the equator. Once he crossed that line, he would find the land of his dreams. The little penguin sailed on and on. Pablo looked at the land and he saw a pretty town, but the fog became so thick that Pablo had to cut it with a knife. I must be near the equator, Pablo thought. Boing! His boat sailed right into the equator and then bounced back. The line stretched all the way to the left and it stretched all the way to the right. Crossing the equator would not be easy. Pablo checked his map again. He couldn't sail around the equator. He would need some help. But who could help him cross the equator? Pablo looked up. He was surprised to see the answer right in front of him. It was Neptune, king of the seas. The king lifted up the equator and gratefully Pablo waved his thanks as he sailed underneath the line. But once he crossed the equator, Pablo had another problem. His boat was made of ice, and it was melting in the warm sun. And once his boat and his igloo had melted, Pablo jumped into his bathtub, but his bathtub sprang a leak. Would Pablo sink? Of course not. The clever penguin put his shower pipe into the hole, and the water began to spray out of the shower. And suddenly the tub started to pick up speed. Pablo was heading for a sunny island. Pablo landed on a warm beach. He picked a nice banana to eat. It was as bright and yellow as the sun above. Pablo had found the land of his dreams. The end. This story told a lot about not giving up and being persistent. I hope when you have a goal that you don't give up. If you work hard, you'll get there. Have a great day.